I've just gotten back from Mike Mew's office in Purley, where my kids are getting a little bit of treatment. It made me realise that I probably should do a video on children's faces, because it might be able to help your child's facial growth and therefore their quality of life. I've made a video in the past called Face Bonsai versus Mewing, a true story. Now, I made this video before I met Mike Mew, and it wasn't focused on children's faces, it was focused on adult faces, and I used my face to explain what happens to a face when it is made worse through extractive, retractive orthodontics, and then somewhat better again through my own efforts over the years. In this video, I wanted to talk to you about children, because I think for those of you who are relatively new parents, you can actually do something for your kids. Now, most kids today don't have correctly grown faces. There's a very good reason for that. We're evolved to be chewing food, really having to work to get sustenance from food instead of getting plenty of nutrients from just some soft carbohydrate. And there's a myriad of other things I think you could bring into the equation, such as pollutants and sedentary lifestyles, probably all cumulatively contribute to this. Anyway, I'm not going to get into what exactly is causing this. Clearly, there is an environmental change that has happened since we were living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So your child likely is not achieving their genetic potential. It's very rare that they would be. If we were living in the hunter-gatherer days, it would be very rare that they wouldn't be, because they wouldn't survive. Back then, you had to have a well-grown face to be able to breathe and eat efficiently. Just like in the animal kingdom, you don't get cranio-facial dystrophy anywhere near to the extent that you do in human beings, because we, through our wonderful technology and ability to procure food, etc., have enabled badly grown faces to live in a way that they can't in the natural environment. Faces not growing properly, not being able to accommodate all of our teeth, all of our 32 teeth. I don't think that's genetic. I don't think we're evolving to not be able to accommodate all our teeth. I think it's an environmental impact. That's not to say that there isn't genetics. I got blue eyes, joint earlobes from genetics. But what I am saying is that a badly grown face is not a genetically inherited trait. That is a badly grown face, which is a different thing. If you think their face isn't growing correctly, then it probably isn't. What I would say simply is look at your kid. If their teeth don't have gaps between them, they're milk teeth. We're talking about a 6 to 9 year old kid, younger as well. You can start this younger than that. If you can see that your child doesn't have gaps between their milk teeth, that's a very good indication that they haven't achieved facial growth. Now, the reason you need gaps between your milk teeth is, you just think about it. Your large teeth have got to come through, your adult teeth, they're bigger than your milk teeth. They need gaps to be able to come through straight. Also, there's more of them as opposed to 20, you have 32. You need gaps between your milk teeth. That is the manifestation of a fully grown palate that will be able to accommodate the adult teeth. And you just have to look at ancient skulls, ancient juvenile skulls, to see that they had gaps between the milk teeth. And when you have a child that has straight milk teeth but no gaps, it might look relatively okay, probably a bit narrow, but you might think, oh, they've got a nice smile. It's only when their adult teeth come through that you realise, oh, wait a minute, they're all crowded. And that's because they've never had enough space, because they never had the gaps between their milk teeth. An overly long face, that's usually accompanied by mouth breathing. Far worse for you than nose breathing. And one of the reasons for that actually is filtration of nasal breathing. There's a probable correlation between mouth breathing and enlarged adenoids, which is quite common in children. And that further, you can imagine, restricts nasal breathing. Another thing you can look out for, the white part of the eye visible in a straightforward expression, and that would indicate a lack of facial structure, facial support. But I do think that the lack of space between milk teeth is a really good indication. It's a really kind of clear indication. Your child's not going to have enough space to accommodate their teeth, and that therefore means that their whole mid-facial growth is not where it should be. The best way that you can tell is just to look at their face and sort of objectively analyse it, because it's very clear if a face is healthy or not healthy. Unfortunately, a lot of parents look at their kids and think, oh, well, they're going to need braces. Wait till they're of age to get braces. They turn 13 or so and then they get braces. And that just ends up with a bad aesthetic and a bad functional result. Less space, less breathing and eating space, less space for the tongue, longer, rounder face. In traditional orthodontics, the idea is that you wait for the child to grow up to an age where you can start to treat them, which sadly is is completely wrong, because the problem with us is that we're not growing correctly. When you should be treating it is when you can affect it and help the growth to get to where you need to be. If you wait and let it fuse more and then try and treat it, well, what you're left with is limited options. And what has happened in the past, and what happened in my case, in many cases, is teeth were extracted, faces were pulled back. Some orthodontists don't pull teeth, but they still move teeth back to enable space for other teeth, and still has a detrimental effect on the face. If you're using heavy wires and bands to move teeth back, you're retracting the face, unfortunately. And that happens now, believe it or not, at the time of this video, which I find just bizarre and criminal, because the information is there now. Orthodontics initially was all about allowing space, getting the face to grow to allow space for teeth to come through. Somewhere along the line, that idea got hijacked. It became all about bite alignment and teeth alignment and pulling teeth out to make teeth straight. And actually, part of that too was motivated by its premise that the European face is the ideal face, which sounds ridiculous when you say it now. And even worse than that, that the ideal European face was somehow a flat face, flat from eye to mouth, when in actual fact, the healthiest face is a projected face with room for the tongue, room for breathing, room for eating, room for swallowing. Orthodontics was actually trying to pull faces, hinge them down, lengthen them, and make them long from here to here and flat, as opposed to out like that, which is horrific when you think about negative health knock-on effects, not to mention aesthetic knock-on effects. And what's clear is when you get in countries where you have lots of different ethnicities, you see the cranio-facial dystrophy start to come generationally as people adapt to this type of living, this convenience-based living. It all gets worse regardless. So we're all the same, we're all influenced by the environment. Superficial trends aside, a well-grown face from one part of the world looks more similar to a well-grown face from another part of the world. It's a human tribal look than it does to a badly grown face from its own part of the world. There is an inherent quote-unquote attractiveness to the human face, the correctly grown human face, and a quote-unquote ugliness to an incorrectly grown face. What we perceive as attractiveness is just a healthy face. And orthodontics doesn't promote extraction, retraction orthodontics anyway, certainly doesn't promote a healthy or attractive face. It promotes an ugly, unhealthy face. If you think any of what I'm saying is sort of fringy logic, just consider that Dr. Weston Price, in the 1930s, he studied indigenous faces, faces that weren't exposed to the Western diet at the time. What he found was that the Western diet of processed food, white flour, sugar, had a negative effect on facial and dental development. He also put forward the idea that modern dietary habits encourage the development of allergies and airway obstruction, which contributes to mouth breathing. He also talked about a change in tongue posture. Orthodontics, rather than taking the view that faces aren't growing correctly and that's why we're not accommodating all of our teeth, there was more of a view that this is an evolutionary condition, not an environmental condition. With the European bias of that thinking, that evolutionarily an incorrectly grown face is what we should be trying to attain. And that's what I'm talking about with the thinking, the foundational thinking of orthodontics. Now, of course, I'm not saying orthodontists today have some European bias-based agenda. No, that's not what I'm saying, just to be clear. But what I am saying is that just the foundational knowledge is based on incorrect science. If you want to go along with that thinking, wait till your kid turns about 13 and then take them along to a traditional orthodontist. What you should be concerned about is ultimately not whether your kid has straight teeth, whether their face is grown to its correct form and function. And then they will have straight teeth. Maybe not piano key straight teeth, which I don't think is particularly nice anyway. It's impossible not to have straight teeth if you have room for your teeth. So you should be focused on growth, not straight teeth. Firstly, ensure that your child, as much as you can, has correct posture, shoulders back, upright posture, particularly when eating, elbows off the table. These are things that Mike Mew actually talks about. They sound really fundamental, and they are. It's kind of that idea of good manners. Chewing correctly, mouth closed, lips sealed, and another big one, swallowing. And pausing just before you swallow. and then swallowing. Now, these are all things that Mike discusses, and when you hear them, they sound, maybe you might think like they're not really aggressively dealing with the issue, but actually they are. And there's a small caveat with that, and that is that you won't be able to do these, or your child won't be able to do these properly if they don't have correct facial growth. Nose breathing, probably the most important one. Ensure that your child is not breathing through their mouth. And if they are, and particularly at night, I would be taping their mouth. Now, you make sure that your child can breathe properly, and we're not talking, please, we're not talking gaffer tape or something that's, we're talking a thin strip of tape that's not particularly strong, that's just strong enough to keep their lip closed at night, so that if they do wake up and are unable to breathe, they just open their mouth and they can breathe. No thumb sucking. Really stop them thumb sucking. I mean, we had thumb suckers, and we put socks on their hands. Just stop them thumb sucking, because what that does is it draws the palate in. I don't think that was something that we used to do as much. I think there was a lot more breastfeeding happening to a lot later age, and that's another thing that I think you need to consider. And I'm not here to tell parents what to do, and particularly mothers. I know breastfeeding can be difficult. I would just recommend that you breastfeed as long as you can. There are many reasons that breastfeeding is healthy for your child, but I think one of them that perhaps isn't talked about enough is facial growth. Breastfeeding is better for facial growth than pacifiers, for example. It's the natural order of things, and that's what we're trying to get as close to, although we're never going to achieve it in this world that we live in, where we drive cars and record videos on phones, but we're trying to replicate as much of that as we can. Now, all of these techniques that I've mentioned are about one thing: enabling your child to get their tongue up on the roof of their mouth. And that's vitally important. That is what's going to reinforce the correct growth. That's also what's going to promote and create the correct upward-outward growth of the midface, and therefore swinging up of the mandible, and the whole face is going to project in the correct direction if you can get the tongue up on the roof of the mouth. And that's what is termed in the business as mewing. And the reason it's called mewing is because this fundamental principle has been explained and understood and popularized by Mike Mew. I just want to say that on record, because I think this is, within health systems, going to become recommendations for the health of the population. If we can get tongues up on roofs of mouths and correct facial growth, it's going to have a knock-on effect, a statistically measurable knock-on effect on the improvement of health of a population. There's been a lot of backlash against Mike Mew by the orthodontic establishment, and that's something that really disgusts me. I'm not going to dwell on it too much in this video, but essentially the reason I see it, broadly speaking, is twofold. One is a lack of understanding, unwillingness to look at things from cranio-facial development rather than teeth and bites and alignment and pulling and moving teeth around and manipulating teeth. But the other is monetization. It's not as easy to monetize getting your tongue up on the roof of the mouth. However, it is actually a monetizable business model, and that's because so many of us don't have the facial growth, and our children don't have the facial growth to accommodate being able to mew. I'm going to get on to the treatment itself that you can get for your child if you think their face isn't growing correctly. But I just want to put a challenge out there to any extraction retraction orthodontist. Pick 20 of your best extraction patients, and we'll put them up against 20 of Mike Mew's. This isn't an advertorial piece of content. This is editorial. That's a personal... Mike hasn't endorsed this video in any way. I would love to see that, a face-off. And I know it's a bit of a gimmicky stunt, but something like that needs to be done just to get the awareness out there. The faces of the patients that Mike Mew treats all improve their facial growth. The patients of orthodontists all look worse after they get their braces off. And the braces themselves actually provide a small amount of facial protection. That's something I noticed, that I looked even worse once I actually got the physical braces off, because the face that was already flatter and the mouth that was smaller became even smaller once the braces came off. Maybe Mike Mew can't say that as aggressively because of the situation and the pressure he's under. But that's the truth. There's nothing in this for me except my children's health, my children's facial development. This has gone on for too long. Mike Mew's right. He's been right all along. John Mew's been right before Mike. Orthodontics, you've been ruining faces for too long. You need to stop. It's still happening. I'm seeing it happening now. I can't believe it. And I feel kind of guilty because I feel like I need to do something, but at the same time, it's not my place to speak to a parent and say, don't do that. But please, don't do that to your kids, please. The quickest way to melt your face away is to stop getting your tongue up on the roof of your mouth. And if you don't believe me, take a look at this guy. He couldn't get his tongue on the roof of his mouth because of motor neuron disease. His mid-face melted away. His maxilla became replaced by his mandible. His bottom teeth superseded his mid-face. I mean, it's very clear. That's not just the aging process, that's a face melting away. And that's what happens when you can't get your tongue up on the roof of the mouth. It's a deformity. And what our kids have is a mild form of deformity, if measured against normal human growth. Now, mewing is what we used to do back in the day, back in the hunter-gatherer times, without thinking about it. Our tongues would be pressing up against the roofs of our mouths, promoting that shallow, wide arch, and we all had broad faces, and we could breathe and eat comfortably. Now, the good news is if you can help your child's face, they will start mewing. If you can get normal human growth, they will mew. They won't be thinking about it. It'll just happen. That's what happens. You sleep and you wake up and your tongue's hard pressed against the roof of your mouth because you've got space. That's where it wants to be. But if you don't have space, if you've got a arch, and I've talked about this in other videos, you won't be able to get your tongue up on the roof of your mouth. Now, that is a crucial concept. That's what all of this is about. What you need to do if your kid isn't growing correctly is get some expansion. Helping the palate to expand and grow as it wants to grow, as it isn't able to grow because of modern life. Ultimately that's the core thing that I want to get through in this video. So I'm going to talk about treatment now that you can get for your child if your child doesn't have correct cranio-facial growth. I'm lucky I live in London at the moment, so I am taking my children to Mike Mew's clinic. I believe that's the very best option available on planet Earth. It's a personal recommendation. If you live in and around London or anywhere in the UK, or indeed slightly further afield, consider strongly going to Mike Mew's clinic. He knows how to get your child's face to grow. And I think too often orthodontists look at a particular area of crowding and talk very technically about what's happening and how they can alleviate that by moving teeth and manipulating things. And Mike understands all that to a high degree, but he never loses sight of the fact that ultimately it's about facial growth, and that's the key. Upswinging of the face and growing the face out and allowing room. His father founded orthotropics, the idea of facial growth, not just dealing with teeth, but dealing with the face through orthodontics, and that practice is called orthotropics. And another thing I would say as well is just look at his own face. He understands it inherently because his father, who has a face that's very different because he had his teeth pulled and face pulled back, his father understood that and was able to give Mike the type of growth that gets him close to his optimal. Mike is someone who understands what that means from inside of a face. I think that's important. So that's a personal recommendation. If you have a child and you suspect their face isn't growing correctly, take them to Mike Mew. It's the best gift you could give. If you have a child, the age you can best affect them is, as John and Mike Mew have shown, up to the age of 9. You don't want to leave it later than that. Ideally a bit earlier, I think, too. If you treat them early enough, you can correct the problem. You can actually not just treat the symptom, but actually treat the cause. The cause is a not correctly grown face. The journey I've been on over the last 30 years, going from a bad face because I had teeth pulled and I had very aggressive retractive orthodontics, and then improving somewhat. So I've shifted to some degree up and down what I call the FaceTime continuum. So I feel like I can speak from that perspective. But certainly I'm not an expert. And John Mew and Mike Mew, these guys are experts. There may be other practitioners who believe in the principle of facial growth and are doing an effective job as well. You know, provided they adhere to the tropic premise, sealed lips, correct tongue posture, mouth closed, that's the postural aim. An upswing of the face, a horizontal upswing of the face is the best way to achieve that postural aim. As long as they believe the idea of growing a face to be able to accommodate all of it's 32 teeth, then that's going to get you what you need. I think we're in a situation right now where I can feel a tidal shift. There's an acknowledgement that this is right. We should be trying to replicate what we naturally are supposed to be. And it feels like we're moving away from horrible orthodontics, frankly, into a more holistic approach. Kids are kids, and you've got to let kids be kids. And kids are beautiful. All kids are beautiful. And I see lots of children's faces aren't growing correctly. Doesn't mean I don't still think, what a darling little creature who is so innocent. And, I certainly don't want to talk to the parent directly about this stuff, which is why I'm putting out a video like this. And just hopefully people can find this information themselves. And if it sounds logical and correct to them, then they can approach their child's facial growth in the correct way, frankly. And if not, then they'll probably go to a traditional orthodontist or do nothing, and their child will have to live with those results. Anyway, I think that's enough. If you enjoy this video, please do subscribe, and I would love to hear from you if you have any children or if you yourself have had orthodontic treatment. Yeah, I think it's a discussion that there needs to be more of. Okay, till next time. Bye.